These are the numbers of the men armed for battle who came to David at Hebron to turn Saul's kingdom over to him, as the Lord had said. From Judah, carrying shield and spear, 6,800 armed for battle. From Simeon, warriors ready for battle, 7,100. From Levi, 4,600, including Jehoiada, leader of the family of Aaron, with 3,700 men, and Zadok, a brave young warrior with 22 officers from his family. From Benjamin, Saul's tribe, 3,000, most of whom had remained loyal to Saul's house until then. From Ephraim, brave warriors, famous in their own clans, 20,800. From the half-tribe of Manasseh, designated by name to come and make David king, 18,000. From Issachar, men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do, 200 chiefs with all their relatives under their command. That's from 1 Chronicles chapter 12.
All right, so
Danae and I just keep coming back to these men from Issachar who understood what Israel should do. They knew the times.
Yeah, that has been really interesting to me after I started doing that study with a couple friends, a couple younger women, and I don't actually remember what the study was on, but I remember his focus was being with people or being led by people who understood the times and knew how to respond to it. And it made me think about how times call for different things and different responses. And so when we tried to solicit a blanket response, or try to mandate, I guess, a blanket response from all people in the same way at all times, you're missing that certain times call for certain responses or certain teachings or certain emphases that other times may not. And so I think that's probably what we're going to get into a little bit now. But the reason that we're doing this particular recording is because I asked you if you thought it would be a good idea for a response. I wanted to do a response to a video that I saw on Instagram, and it was really, it just didn't sit well with me, and I was trying to articulate why it didn't sit well, and so we had a conversation about it. And so I think maybe should I just play the video so everyone can hear what we're discussing first? Okay, so everyone, a lot of people will know this voice, and they like this person a lot, so let's listen.
Needs to hear this. Actually, I do. It's me. Motherhood is not an aesthetic. And what I mean by that is, in the Christian natural world, especially on social media, we are made to think that being a Proverbs 31 mom means that you have to look like you are living on a farm in the 19th century. And that is great. But that is not a qualification for being a biblical woman or for being a godly, loving mother. You don't have to make your own sourdough. You don't have to cultivate your own garden. You don't have to homeschool in order to be a Christ-like woman and a Jesus-loving wife and mom. I love those things. I think that's great. But if you're anything like me, you're never going to make your own sourdough. And maybe you're feeling a little bit guilty for that. You think that you need to be a better homemaker by making everything from scratch. Look, even watching people make things from scratch, it exhausts me. I love that for them. I want them to do that. I think that's great. That will never be me. And if you're like me, just know that that doesn't inhibit you from being a great wife and a great mom and from keeping an orderly home. Motherhood is not an aesthetic. It is a calling that God places on our lives, and He sets the standards, not social media.
Okay, so everyone probably that would listen to this knows Allie Beth Stuckey. People love her. I mean, she's great. I remember one of the things that I admired about her, one interview that I loved the most that she did was with Dallas Jenkins. He's the guy that created The Chosen, I believe. I think that's his name. But there was some controversy, if you remember, with him talking about Mormonism Do you remember that at all?
Nope.
Anyway, it was kind of as, if I remember this correctly, so everyone can go back and check this, but if I remember correctly, it was, the controversy was around him just kind of soft pedaling and not addressing what biblical Christians would acknowledge are the issues with Mormonism, that it's a cult, but that's for another discussion. And so she had an interview with him and asked him some questions about this. It was near the end of the interview. It was like a very congenial, encouraging, kind of like a brother and a sister talking to each other type of interview. And then at the end, she did bring up this issue with him and speaking about Mormonism. Not to be confused with him speaking about Mormons. He was speaking about Mormonism. And he, from what I remember, he did the same thing, kind of didn't want to address it and said like, well, I know a lot of Mormons and they might be believers, which could be true, but they're not believing the Mormon gospel if they are believers. And she pushed him on it a lot. And I thought that was, it was really bold. And we know scripture says that the righteous are bold as lions, and she wasn't afraid to kind of make it awkward in that moment. So that's just one of my favorite interviews with her. My first exposure to her, I thought, wow, it would be really great if there were more. At the time, I thought it would be really great if there were more conservative female voices. Now I would change that to Christian female reformed voices. I like that about her. And I think, what she talks about politically, I would mostly all align with. I think she's quick on her feet. She knows scripture really well, and she's not afraid to make enemies for the right reasons. So this isn't the reason I'm bringing this video up, isn't because I just want to kind of knock this person that is esteemed kind of in a lot of our circles. I don't know if I've ever even met someone who that listened to her, that knew her and ever listened to her, that ever had like anything critical to say about her, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think if you look at evangelical Christian voices or people, well, no, that's not what I mean. If you look at conservative political commentators and people who say they're Christian, broadly speaking, the like a more conservative, reformed evangelical perspective isn't common. It's very rare that you'll find that in a popular, widely listened to political commentator. Charlie Kirk might be another one, but I can't think of anybody else that's operating in that sphere. So she's a little bit of a rare bird.
As like a reform. Is Charlie Kirk?
I don't know if he's reformed.
But it seems like he's evangelical.
Like strong evangelical Christian.
Yeah,
where we would align pretty well on a lot of theological.
And even more rare, obviously, that she's female, and that she is reformed. More rare. So I think the tendency, I mean, we can kind of diagnose this later, or not at all, but just my initial thoughts is the tendency to not critique at all probably comes from the fact that there are so few people in our camp that kind of are representative. And so you don't really want to knock your one representative and say anything critical, because you have, in a sense, it's like you understand where they're coming from. You understand they're like you. And so there's a familiarity, there's a filial, I guess, affection there too. And so I think with that, people are reticent to and not ready to be critical in any way. So everything is positive in that sphere. And it's hard for people to disagree with people that are in their camp.
Okay. Before we really dive into the conversation, there was one thing that I was thinking about this the other day. I met with some men from our church on Wednesday evening, and they were talking about getting feedback, like performance review at work, and whether we allow or don't allow feedback that we get that's negative to shake our confidence or to inform who we are, or whether we believe who we are, that we are the one who God says we are, and we allow the people that know us better to witness into our lives about who we are. And someone mentioned, yeah, it takes, maybe 7+ positive things that someone says about you to cancel out a negative thing. If you have an interaction where they say something negative and then 2 or 3 positive things, you go away thinking that it's terrible. And it just doesn't sit well with me. So you started the podcast basically almost like apologizing that we're about to critique her, like, oh no, we love her, she's so good, she's right about all this stuff, and then we're going to go on and critique her. It just seems weird that we're in this position, and I don't know if it's cultural, if it's Christian, if it's godly or not. But to me, sometimes, if I'm at work and I have an issue with a subordinate that I need to address, it almost feels weird and fake that I have to come up with some positive things in order to tell them something negative. And it almost feels like I'm stretching sometimes to come up with enough positive things so that I can tell them a way that they're not doing their job correctly and they need to improve. So I don't really know if you have any thoughts on that, or just let that kind of
I
sit.
do. I mean, I think it's good to remember that. I think it is part of our cultural moment to heap on. One of like the central tenets of our cultural moment is to sandwich everything: positive, critique, positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you hear this from lots of people in leadership. Like that's how you need to talk to people: is positive, critique, positive. And I don't know if I have a full opinion on that, other than I was going to respond to specifically what you said, that different people are called to different things, that you might be someone who is not made for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I might be, being the female that I am, more geared toward that. And I don't think necessarily in and of itself, definitionally, one is primary or better, I guess,
Yeah.
than the other. Because, like we said, people are made for different things. If you did come to someone and first start heaping on praise and then critique them and then heap on more praise, I think if they knew you well enough, it would come off fake, because that's not how you are. And I think,
Well, it feels fake when I do
do you
that.
know what I'm saying? Yeah.
So
That's
maybe
not
other
how
people
we
perceive
interact
it as
either.
fake.
And if you did that to me, if you started off like soft pedaling some things, you're really good at this, blah, blah, I would just be like, oh, good.
Get to the negative.
Yeah. And it honestly, if someone like my friend Emily did that and went straight to me and gave me a critique, I would receive that from her much differently than I received it from you, her being female. So there's probably, again, a different call for different times and different people. But the other thing, I think more broadly, is that because a podcast is such a snippet of your conversation, if I don't give people context from where I'm coming from, like I'm coming from a place of in the same camp as opposed to on the opposite side of the camp, there's the battle is different. You know what I mean? I'm not looking to kill. I'm looking to correct, or like we're looking to correct.
Yeah, like you're kind of arm wrestling with somebody that's in the same army as you, not
Right.
looking across the battle line to an enemy.
Right. Yeah. Context, I guess. But I do take that. I think that there is I do think generally there's an overemphasis of heaping on praise that might not even be there or be warranted, just for the sake of not hurting someone's feelings and being, quote, nice. And it's still now, to every time I hear even parents or other people say like, oh, that's not nice, it does kind of bother me, because that's not what Christians are called to be. They're not called to be nice.
Kind, not nice.
You are supposed to be kind, but there are things that you're not to be kind about either. So anyway, does that kind of answer or respond to your question? Okay, so when I was talking to you about this, I was like, do we need to outline everything that we're going to respond with? And you said, no, let's kind of hash it out. We did talk a little bit in the car we're on Sunday. Yeah, on Sunday we're coming home from our date, which we found really good ramen. It was such a great experience. But we're coming home, and I was like, what do we need to have hammered out? And we talked a little bit, and you said, what's kind of your main point, or what's the reason why you want to respond to this? And I said, there were two things that came to mind, if I recall correctly. The first thing is the idea of calling this type of homemaking an aesthetic, number one. And then the second thing was, what do the times call for? And are we aware of what time it is culturally, globally, and more specifically, what we're familiar with in the United States, the trajectory it's going, and what we as Christians together communally should be doing in response to what the times are. So they're really two very different things. Where do you think we should start?
I think start with aesthetic.
Okay, because it's kind of probably easier.
Yeah.
To unpack. So if you remember at the beginning of the video, she says, I don't know who needs to hear this. Oh yeah, it's me. She's kind of, talking to herself. And she says, motherhood's not an aesthetic. Okay, so just right off the bat, is motherhood an aesthetic? No, I'd agree. Motherhood is not in and of itself an aesthetic. But then she goes on. So her first example is of how women are dressing, like on social media, to reflect that type of lifestyle, or to emulate, I guess, that type of lifestyle of like the home, not just the homemaker, but the homesteader. The homemaker, she says, dressing like you're in a 19th century farm.
Yeah, so
like
I'm
that.
imagining a woman in a sundress with a basket and maybe some
fresh cut flowers.
Yeah, fresh cut flowers or something, maybe with some type of hat on, like a.
I honestly don't even know. I wouldn't be able to tell you what people wore on a farm, and but I'm imagining probably that's what she's talking about.
Yeah, looking out over a field, maybe with some little kids. She probably has bare feet.
And there's definitely a cow.
It could be a cow.
There's a cow there.
I mean, honestly, if you gave me that as a painting, a nice oil painting, I would love to have
that's so
something
beautiful.
like that in my house.
Yeah, and I mean, she acknowledges
beautiful.
that too. Like, in a way, she acknowledges that. Like, that's great for them. Now, first off, dress in and of itself, yes, I think that you could reduce a lot of why people dress the way they do down to an aesthetic. And a lot of people that might start changing the way they dress to that type of style may have been heavily influenced by other people on social media that are homesteaders and those types of homemakers that dress like that, and they like the way that looks.
Mm-hmm.
I would say yes, that is very much possible that's why people are doing it.
You have a woman who was a little more tomboyish growing up and never really wore dresses, and then finds that, oh, that's kind of beautiful, starts wearing it, and then actually
But I want to distinguish the beauty and the aesthetic part.
Okay. Well, how would you distinguish those two?
I think that an aesthetic could be something that's just trendy too. Like you want to put on what is current. I mean, it's funny because it's current because it's past. Like the reason that it's trendy now is because it harkens to the past.
Well, it's also, I think it's objectively beautiful.
Yes, but I was going to get there. So first, I would say, because she kind of lays out two things. One thing she lays out is dress, and the other thing she lays out is making things by hand or growing a garden, like the actual work aspect. So the work aspect, she gives one example. She does like sourdough starters, and she says making things from scratch and cultivating a garden. That's the work aspect. And then her other example is dress, which I think those categorically can probably, I think you could distinguish them categorically. So I think that dress could be, for women, it's very easy to want to take on dress, and changing the way you dress is very easy. Changing the way you work is very hard. So it could be very easy to look like a 1900s farmsteader. Then it's easier to do that than it is to be an actual 1900s farmsteader, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of why I'm distinguishing the two. I wanted to give her credit where credit is due. Yes, women can easily think that's attractive, that's cute, that's trendy, whatever. I would like to start wearing that. But like you said, and that is not inherently bad that you want to dress like that. But when you make that equivalent to being a good mother, yes, that would be bad. But I'm doubtful that most people are doing that and equating the dress itself to being a good mother. Like that would be a stretch for me. or to say like I'm a better mother or I'm a more godly woman if I look like a farmer.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? Now, to the beauty part, the beauty element. Christians, I believe, and I think you're getting at this, are supposed to be drawn to what is beautiful and should want beauty wherever they go.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this before in previous episodes, but when Phil and I first got married, we were going to our honeymoon, waiting in the San Diego airport, and you had on a sports jacket, some slacks, whatever, definitely not flip-flops or anything, some type of nice shoe, and I had on yoga pants and I don't know, just comfy.
Like a hoodie or
It was
something.
yeah, definitely. It was definitely, I mean, yes, it was a hoodie. Some hoodie and yoga pants. And I remember thinking that he felt, can I use the word ostentatious? Like,
Yeah.
kind of trying to show
He's
off.
peacocking,
Yeah.
wearing fancy
And I
clothes.
thought, bring yourself down. Like, I wasn't actually thinking that, but that's kind of the dynamic when I saw people dressed like that. Like, that's not how I grew up. We didn't dress like that when we're going traveling. Why would you do that? And over time, I've definitely changed more in his direction than he has changed in my direction. And that is because of the idea that Christians are to bring beauty where they go. And so in the same way that you should not, as a believer, intentionally not shower and smell bad where you go because you're bringing rotten smell where you go, you shouldn't intentionally dress in a way that detracts from the beauty around you. God made his creation so lovely and beautiful. Why would you not compliment that instead of trying to draw away from that beauty and to focus people's eyes on what is like the dirt? I don't want to say necessarily dirty, but more base. Can I say base? Less
you
than.
could say that.
Less than. Just not complimentary. It's like juxtaposed with the beauty of creation. And that really resonated with me because of thinking of the way and the time that God used to make his creation. And the more that you study the cosmos and the natural world, the more that you can see how beauty is imbued in everything that God made. And so I think dress, yes, could be reduced to like a trendy aesthetic, but also I think that women are, and people, Christians, should be and are drawn to beautiful things. So women in dresses, I think, is inherently, if we're talking about a more modern dress, it's a beautiful thing because it's very feminine.
Mm-hmm. And
Men
it's
in our
better
culture don't wear dresses.
Better than the androgynous aesthetic that's
Yeah, right.
on trend right now in some areas.
Right. Yeah, because we want to amplify God's creation and glorify it. And we show, and in that, in dress, you show the distinction between the sexes in the same way that the sun has its glory and the moon has its glory, and you wouldn't compare them to each other and you wouldn't make them the same. Male and female have different beauties, and you heighten and you emphasize those, or you draw them out more. And so that would be, I guess, my critique to people that are drawn to that type of beauty. Good, be drawn to it, because a woman wearing a dress is unlike a woman wearing pants. That it just is. They're just different. Now I know that I'm like clarifying and quartering this, but I like pants. Okay, I'm modern in the sense like I grew up wearing pants all the time. It's more comfortable. I'm warmer a lot of the time. Like when it's cold, I don't like to wear dresses. It's uncomfortable. But if I'm just looking at what is beautiful, it is more beautiful when women wear dresses than it is.
I like you in a dress.
I know you do. I know you do, which encourages me to wear more dresses. But it is more beautiful when women wear dresses than it is when we wear pants. I know people are going to scoff at that, but it is true. So the second thing, though, I think is a little bit deeper and harder, almost harder to kind of unfold and understand. And God help me, give me wisdom in doing this. But she talked again about making your own sourdough and gardening and making things from scratch. And so First, so when she says that it doesn't make you a more loving mother, or maybe she said it doesn't, if you don't do those things, it doesn't make you a less loving mother or wife. And so I think the question that's being begged in that is, what does it mean to be a loving mother and a loving wife? What does it mean to be a mother and a wife at all? So in order to be a mother, well, obviously you have to have children, but a mother and wife is to be distinguished to what, or is to be contrasted or compared to what? Father and husband. So you would need to, I think, kind of define what those two, I don't even know if I'd call them roles or callings, what those two, what would I call
You
them?
could call them that.
Roles or callings. How would I define those differently? Because we would agree that we don't parent. I mother and you father. And so if I were to tell people, yeah, Phil and I parent differently, the proper response in people's heads should be, well, no, duh, because he's a dad and you're a mom. I'm not saying people should say that out loud, but obviously I am going to quote parent different because I mother, and Phil is going to parent different because he's a father. In the same way, I am not a spouse, I'm a wife, and you're not a spouse in as much as you're a husband. That's more defining of who you are than spouses. So what does it mean then to be a mother and to be a wife? What is the calling in motherhood? Is it simply that when you physically bear children that you nurse them until they're weaned? Does it mean that you're going to be a little more gentle if you spank them? Does it mean that you are in charge of doing your daughter's hair and your husband is in charge of dressing the boys? Like, really, what does it mean? Because if you're going to say that something doesn't make you a lesser mother or wife, you need to define then what does make you an excellent mother and wife.
She's saying it's not part of the standard. So what is the standard?
Yeah. So what would you say some of the standards specifically for motherhood and being a wife are in scripture? What do you see repeated patterns of?
So part of being a wife, according to the Bible, is to obey and respect her husband, which is a hard thing to hear for a lot of women. The good thing is you get to choose whether or not you're going to marry a man, and hopefully,
yeah, which man you would marry. Not to be confused with if you're going to marry a woman, but yeah, but whether or not you will marry this particular man.
Yeah. So you choose someone who you, based on your knowledge of them, your connection with their family, your family, that you'll be able to respect and obey. It's the I guess the themes of being receptive and of nurturing life are built into, I mean, they're literally built into the bodies of women. So a woman receives the seed of man during sexual intercourse and then brings forth a child in her womb, and then her body is oriented towards nourishing that baby at her breast. So those same two things, being receptive and being a powerhouse of nurturing nourishment, will go on because it's literally built into woman's biology.
You're saying that extent, it might look different in different seasons, but that principle of, you said, of nourishing, you're being a life giver. Okay, life giver, nourishing, that extends far beyond this nursing stage.
Yeah.
Right? And even when
there's emotional nourishment, there's nutritional nourishment.
Right. And women are, so what about the wife aspect? Would you say what is a principle that is important that extends throughout a woman's life is what comes to my mind is submission and being covered. So women are to be protected. They are to be under protection. And of course, I hear my unmarried friends, that would be the same for my unmarried females and married females. They're to be covered and protected. Actually, probably it's more important that an unmarried female knows who their protector is, because it could be a little more ambiguous if their father has passed away or something like that.
Mhm.
But it's easier for a married woman to say, yeah, my husband is my cover. He is my protector. So if you are covered by something and protected by something, by virtue of being under, I should say, by virtue of being covered, you are under.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand. And so this idea of I'm going to be protected by something, but I'm not going to be under it, doesn't even physically make sense. Like in the physical world, you can't be protected by something unless you're under or behind it,
Mm-hmm.
unless that thing is taking the hits first. So then how would that look in the household for a woman in the household? So she's both covered or under protection, she's under submission, and at the same time, she is what you called like the powerhouse of nourishment or life giving.
Yeah.
And
There's I want to clarify or expound on what I said. So, woman in the sexual act is receptive, but it's receptive for the purpose of bringing about something greater than what she received.
right, yeah,
So a
you make
woman-
it better than what you were
Yeah.
given.
So
Oh, that's
woman
good.
a woman receives this tiny seed, tiny sperm, and then brings forth a full term baby,
Right,
and then takes that baby and nourishes it to grow into a toddler until he's weaned, and a godly woman, a godly wife or mother is going to take the things that are coming into the household and make it better. She's going to take some flowers that she cut from the garden and arrange them into something that's more beautiful in a vase than what they were out in the ground. She's going to take decorations and different colors and textures and make a house that feels warm and welcoming and inviting, and arrange it in such a way that most men don't have the skill, and we're talking about on average or a tendency or norms,
mm-hmm.
but most men don't have that, and it comes far more naturally to women. So a woman takes something small, she takes the income of her
Or the
husband,
raw material,
and beautifies it, glorifies it.
glorified. Yeah, they're glorifiers. They glorify things, which I think is so important for women to notice what a strategic role they play in all of this. I keep coming back to the term, they are culture builders. They are culture makers, because anyone could find the raw material, but you can't necessarily make it into something beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we all know something we've tried before, like, you know what? I'm going to try painting. And obviously, this isn't me advocating for giving up on trying to learn a new skill, but you realize all of a sudden if you have the raw talent for something, or if you don't, if you really need to work at it, and how hard it is to make something really nice.
Yeah.
How hard it is to make something excellent and beautiful. It takes time and effort and patience. This is an ongoing conversation with my students of, if you want to be excellent at this, and if you want to have excellent character, you have to slow down and do the step-by-step work in this. That's the same for women. So I take great issue with the phrase that she used, that I will never be like that. I take great issue with that for several reasons. So she said near the end, when I see people making stuff from scratch, it stresses me out. Just because something stresses you out when you see it doesn't mean you shouldn't face it, or shouldn't try it, or shouldn't do it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you have some role of authority or some teaching role, I would again implore all of us to be really careful about what you're admonishing other women to do or not to do based on their stress level. Like, well, it stresses you. I'll just never be like that. It stresses me out. I'm never going to be like that. There were people that came to Christ as homosexuals that said, I will never be. And that's harder to overcome than someone who's going to start making stuff from scratch. And this isn't me saying everyone needs to make everything from scratch. hear that. Please, when people are listening to this, try to understand what I'm trying to say and don't read into the worst version of what I'm trying to say. So people were homosexuals, were transgender, were murderers, were adulterers when they came to Christ. And Christ changed them. That was a sin they had to overcome. You learning to make, let's say, a fresh baked bread, homemade bread, you're not necessarily overcoming the sin unless you're lazy and you're overcoming laziness, but you're not necessarily overcoming a sin. If Christ can bring people that are gay and transgender and adulterers and murderers, such were some of you, but you were washed, I think that you could probably learn something that isn't in your wheelhouse and might naturally stress you out. It's such a it's so sad to me because God can do so much through you and change you so tremendously and produce so many beautiful things out of you. And then for women to hear, or even tell yourself, this would be for her as well, to say, well, I'm just not geared toward being domestic, is I think it's a cop out. I think it's a cop out. It's not working at things that you're not actually good at. Just a little anecdote, and let me ask you a question. You can answer this. Would you have called me domestic when we got married?
Absolutely not.
I didn't know you would answer so quickly. I always thought it was going to be like a 5-second thing. But you're right.
Yeah.
Now, I cleaned, right? But, I mean, we'll go into this in a second, but domestic, no, making things from scratch super stressed me out. One time
you did have an eye for wanting to make
I did make things
apartment
beautiful.
Yeah, so that would be the main
way that I made beautiful things.
But in terms of food, no.
Absolutely not.
And in terms of your time being oriented more towards the home instead of outside the home, no.
Right. So why I bring that up is because I know it can be very hard. I know it can be really difficult. I know a lot of people know our story of why, we had moved from California, which again is still a really hard thing for me to even talk about. But one of the things, at least in this season, it has really pushed me toward is focusing on the working toward a productive Christian household and working toward fulfilling this call, I think, of motherhood and of being a wife and of creating a culture in the home that I wasn't able to do before because I was more oriented outside the household. And so this might lead us to asking, well, how do we know that women are supposed to be oriented to the home? And so naturally, if I may read Titus 2, at the beginning of Titus 2, it says, "But as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness. Older women, likewise, are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled." And in there, we obviously see that phrase, working at home, and then notice what it's between. It's between pure and kind, which is interesting. You don't have this list of like culturally relevant tasks, right? And you don't even really have at the end a cultural reason. The reason is so the word of God may not be reviled. And so I know that I've heard people say, well, not all women work at home anymore. And it seems similar to saying, well, not all women are kind anymore, so we're just going to remove that. Or saying, well, not all women need to be submissive to their husband anymore because we're not in that type of culture where we need to like submit to a man who's going to protect us because we have other protections now. I don't want to be so liberal with the text and so loose with the text and just say, well, this isn't culturally relevant, because there's a lot of things that aren't culturally relevant that we have dismissed kind of mindlessly, just because it doesn't seem like it jives with our culture.
Yeah, and even people who have, even women in particular, but men as well, who have rejected some of the obvious norms, societal norms, or teachings or truisms associated with feminism, have adopted many others without
Right.
even really knowing it.
Right. Yes. And so from this passage and from other passages, you see a pattern of where women typically they were created for. What was their telos? What was the purpose of women? And it seems to me that the telos of women, what you could kind of summarize it as is life giver and nurturer. Like overall, women were not life takers. They weren't meant to be the ones that were in the battlefield. They weren't meant to be the ones that were adjudicating or that were in the role of assessing a
Magistrate.
judgment.
Yeah.
You see this also in Exodus when Moses talks to his father-in-law and his father-in-law realizes, wow, it's kind of such a mess right now. You are answering everyone's needs. And he tells him, you need men under you to do the smaller tasks. And he explains what the men are supposed to be like. They are supposed to be honorable men. They are supposed to be men with integrity, but it's all men.
Mm-hmm.
All men were in those roles. I don't want to take liberty and say, well, because maybe it was only cultural, I'm going to ignore that. I would like to be as faithful to the scriptures as I can unless I am convinced.
Because Deborah was a judge, and
this is one woman.
When the overwhelming witness of scripture was men leading.
Right. And also we've talked about Isaiah when they're talking about the Israelites being ruled. It says, and women rule, or was it the Israelites being ruled? It was kind of a mocking statement, and women rule over them. You don't find as a pattern, women ever in that role. And so again, the question is, well, where are women meant to flourish? And again, this isn't woman, right? We should be thinking as Christians, at least in some cases, what is our group response? How should we as a group, as Christians, as covenant people, be responding to together? We should have some type of joint effort in this, and not every man for itself, which it kind of has. That's kind of what our culture is. Well, you do you, whatever is right.
Well, that's what she basically said.
She says, yeah, it's good for them. I'm glad they are making the sourdough or whatever, but that's not for me. And part of that also, in her saying that motherhood is an aesthetic and then lays out these examples of how it's an aesthetic, it reduces that work in and of itself, the work of gardening, creating things from scratch, taking raw materials and turning into something else. That those examples reduce the value of those things to aesthetics in and of themselves, which I think is also an issue. Because if we go back to beauty also, those things are inherently beautiful. They're inherently beautiful. They aren't in and of themselves like making things from scratch, sewing. People are into handiwork, right? Or handicraft. I don't even know what the term is, but crocheting and knitting and needlepoint. I don't know all of them, but those things are inherently beautiful. And so I think what the response to women should be, you don't have to make sourdough, but you should definitely be cultivating domestic skills, because you should be a worker at home, like oriented toward the home. That doesn't mean you're staying inside. It means that your work is creating a culture in the home that is helping it to flourish, that is helping it to give life, that is supporting, that is bringing beauty in your home. It's not taking beauty away or time away from your home or taking life away from your home or oriented everyone else outside of the home. When the epicenter of the home is outside and everyone's epicenter is actually in different locations, that's a problem. the epicenter should be the the larger, not just the nuclear family, but the people together, right? Oriented together. How do we build this culture for the benefit not just primary of the family, but that overflows to everyone. It overflows to your neighbors, it overflows to your friends, it overflows to the people you work with. But you have to build something together first in order for that to flow outwards. You can't build things outside and expect the home in and of itself to flourish.
So I wonder perhaps if what's going on in her in Allie Beth Stuckey's head and in her spirit is as she looks at the work that she does in political and spiritual commentary, teaching, that goes out to millions of people every episode, and then looks at the time that it would take her to cultivate domestic skills that are oriented towards the household, and she's making a judgment call that the work that I'm doing that goes outside the home to impact the culture and all these people and politics and church life, it's more important, and it's kind of more bang for the buck for the kingdom, and maybe even for the family name and the family legacy than learning how to bake bread or tending a garden or something.
I would, however, be careful to assess any further than what she said herself.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering.
It could be. It could be, but there's a lot of could be's, obviously. And I think it is very obvious, though, that the emphasis of motherhood is more toward this personal piety or passing along maybe scripture to your kids when you're with them and making sure that they are fed, right? Physically fed, that they are clothed, that they are healthy. I mean, in some respects, than it is like that seems to be the primary mother concern, is that she talked about having an orderly house. I don't exactly know what she means by that, but I'm assuming it means that it is not total chaos and insanity.
Yeah.
And but the focus would not be, from what she said, just taking her words, the focus would not be a culture building at home. Like, primarily I'm focusing on building culture and building skills in my household that passes on for generations and blesses people outside the home.
Yeah. And so let me unpack at least on the nutrition perspective, because I think it's the easiest,
I think that's
about
helpful.
why I think what she said with sourdough and homemade or scratch made food is it's actually wrong. So it's becoming increasingly obvious to me and to Danae the more that we look and understand that our food is poison in the United States. Our government has allowed farming companies, massive multinational conglomerates, to put all kinds of chemicals in our food. There's chemicals in the water, in the environment, in the packaging that our food comes in. And so when you go to the grocery store and you're buying food that has ingredients on the label, not whole foods, if you're buying non-organic foods, there is a really good chance that there's ingredients in those foods that actually harm you. So yes, they have calories. Yes, they fill up bellies. Yes, they might taste good. So you can buy processed, prepared foods. You can buy meal kits. You could get takeout. I have no idea what's going on in her household as far as meals. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of scratch-made stuff, and I don't know what she's defining as the distinction between scratch-made versus homemade versus maybe
like a meal kit.
Like a meal kit.
Something,
like
I don't know.
You buy the meatloaf at Costco and then put it in your oven.
Yeah.
Versus then getting takeout from a restaurant, because there's a wide range in that.
Right.
But if a husband and a wife are responsible for their children and for their own bodies as well, and their primary nutrition comes from highly processed foods with lots of canola and corn and soy oils and other things that are becoming increasingly clear, even to normal people. Like, there's a reason why
Even to normal
there's a
people.
reason why Americans are fatter than people in other
And have
countries.
so many autoimmune
Yeah.
disorders, so many chronic conditions that are undiagnosable. Right.
So it really is incumbent upon the mother and the father to figure out how to bring healthy food into their household so that they can nourish their bodies and go out and love their neighbor, serve the world,
And just
glorify
honor
God,
your
and
honor
honor
your
their own,
body
and
as a
honor their own bodies.
temple.
Yeah. And so that doesn't mean you can't order pizza for the family every so often, but if you're gonna, I really think in this particular moment, having some source of food that's not from a grocery store, that's clean, you know where it comes from, that's gonna become more and more important over the next decade. And knowing how to take some raw ingredients and transform it into, take grain and grind it and make your own flour and into bread. We saw during COVID how fragile the supply chain is, and how even with the toilet paper thing, or with other things, all of a sudden you go to the grocery store and you could always get a head of lettuce, or you could always get eggs, and it's like, oh, one per customer, things like that. So having food that you know where it comes from, whether you've made it yourself or you're in a network of people in your local area, so that you're resilient and you know that the food is healthy, and so that you have something, a tradition or knowledge, skills to pass down to your children. Because I don't see that the government is going to intervene and change our food supply. There are people who come from Europe or go live in Europe, and they're basically eating the same things here in the United States and in Europe, and here they get fat and they don't feel good, and in Europe they don't. And it's because of things like glyphosate, which is Roundup, weed killer that is sprayed on grains to desiccate them at the harvest time, because they can eke out that much more profit, but they don't allow that. The governments don't allow that in Europe with their grains. Some of the people who think they have a gluten sensitivity may actually be sensitive to the glyphosate that's on our flour versus what you would get in Europe. So people are eating the same diet when they go visit Europe, and yeah, maybe they're walking more because they're touring around and seeing all the museums and sites. But also the food is cleaner and healthier, because as wicked as our government and some European governments are, at least in the food, they've looked and they've not sacrificed the health of their populace for the sake of convenience and abundance.
Mm.
They'd rather eat less but of a higher
Decadence.
quality. Yeah.
It's a sin of decadence in our
So
society.
anyway, all that to say, I think when it's not the law of God that you have to make food from scratch,
Mm-hmm.
but it is the law of God that parents are supposed to take, parents, mothers and fathers, or in particular mothers, because of their orientation towards the household, are responsible to bring a relatively healthy diet with treats. And we believe in feasting, and we believe in fasting, like to figure out how to bring nutritious food onto the table in their house. And like the men of Issachar who knew the times in the United States right now it's increasingly harder to get that kind of food on the table unless you have the domestic skills to cook from scratch, or to really cook well. Because if you're buying food from a restaurant, or you're buying some, like a microwave or frozen lasagna, or it's just so different than what you could make if you made it from scratch. And if you hear that and it feels like a heavy burden, you don't have to change the way that your family eats and cooks tomorrow. You can start to make a small change every month, and by the end of the year you've made 12 changes. And making 12 changes in, oh, we're not going to buy seed oils anymore, We're going to throw away what we have, and we're going to find alternative fats. Oh, we're going to get rid of our Febreze and our Glade plugins because of the chemicals they're producing, and they're disrupting people's hormones.
I'm going to learn how to make one meal from scratch.
Yeah.
And I'll just keep doing that one meal
until
once
I
a week.
master it.
You know, for a while, because I think sometimes we have a mentality of all or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't do it, if I can't make sourdough make my own sourdough starter, I'm just never doing anything from scratch. Yeah. And it's hard. It's a lot of patience, a lot of work.
Yeah.
But you can build a lot of new skills, and you will bless people. You will be fulfilled because God has made that dignifying work that blesses your own soul. And it means something fundamentally different when you have a group of people at your table and they're eating food from your garden one day or that was made with your own hands. To them, it feels different to them. When I sit down and I eat food from made by someone there, as opposed to they got takeout and brought it home. I mean, I love a good takeout, okay? But there is an aspect of love and thought that went into making a meal that is there's nothing to compare with it.
Yeah.
Like takeout can't compare with that. And so to kind of capitalize on in this part of our conversation on the sons of Issachar knowing the signs of the times, or knowing the times and how to respond to it. The other thing that is really lacking, I think, in our time is gendered piety and understanding how men and women are different, not just in the walls of the church or how the church functions, but how men and women were created different. They weren't given arbitrary roles, but they were created different. And so I think it's incumbent, it's prudent of us to really dig into that as Christians and think about, I could grab hold of my liberty and freedom and say, I don't technically have to do A, B, C, and D. I don't technically have to. But being a Christian, I care more about the name of Christ, about him being glorified, and about building a Christian culture that doesn't just bless my children, although that's kind of what I'm focused on first, but allows for the flourishing of all men and women when we grow that. I'm going to lay down the right that I have to say, no, I don't want to do X, Y, and Z, or no, I don't like, I'm going to give kind of maybe a silly example, but no, I don't want to wear dresses because I don't have to. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to buy more dresses and wear more because I want to emphasize and highlight how men and women are different. Because the culture is so androgynous and loves blurring the distinction between men and women, I want to act opposite of that, not in a brash or a pompous way, but in a way that brings glory to the Creator from what He created. We're not just ministering. It's not just about us. Like who did God make Danae? Yes, that's one thing. Who did God make Danae? But God made me a female, and what it means to be female is something that communicates something to this physical world and also the host of heaven. Like, don't forget that angels are also watching us. We're an illustration of the greatness of God to heavenly beings that we've never talked to, interacted with, because it glorifies the Father. So I would encourage people to dive into that, to emphasize that where they can, to bring beauty where they are. And if there is, the caution would be if there are other females around you, like you're digging into this and there's other females around you that don't make anything from scratch, they buy everything from the store, and you're working really hard to do this and they're not at all, don't pass judgment on them. Like, where you can encourage them, great, but especially if it's older female, younger females, don't insert yourself. It really is not your place to teach older women what to do or how to correct themselves. But when you have an opportunity later to teach a younger woman, that's your opportunity to instruct her in those ways. So be humble in that. Don't just compare yourself to other people. think about how can I be the most faithful with how God has created me? What do the times call for? How can I encourage those that are younger than me? Of course, if someone asks you, that opens up the door. But this isn't a call to be overly critical of people, but this is a call to be more faithful.
A lot of what goes on in my fellow Christians' households is none of my business.
Right. And I think that's a helpful position to
Probably our default position
default. Yeah.
about domestic things that are generally within the framework of Christian freedom is like, not my business.
Right.
If you're asked, absolutely. And I don't think it's wrong to, what we're trying to do here is more speak in generalities with some specific examples, not to
Well, and
bind
people can choose to listen to it.
Yeah, and not
No
to
one's
bind
forced.
people's consciences to say, "Oh, you must do this." It's not like Jesus is going to be standing there in heaven with a checklist saying, "Oh, well, you as a woman and a mom with your piety, did you bake sourdough? Did you do this from scratch?" That's not part of it. But it doesn't mean that isn't a potentially important thing to do, especially in this time.
Right. Yeah.
In this
Read the
moment.
times. Read the times. I'll is your back uncomfortable? You're kind of like moving around.
A little bit.
Okay. What were you just gonna say? You had
Nothing.
your mouth open and nothing came out.
I was going to say something else.
Okay. So I think the last thing on my list was, and I don't know if it might directly relate to this. Be cautious of the slow fade into certain norms. If there's nothing, if you're not actively pushing against or working against the norm, you're probably not working in the correct direction. And what I mean by that is the conveniences that are afforded to us and the way that people naturally like to make life easier is, could I say insidious? It could be a trap to people because everyone wants to make life more streamlined and easier and simpler, but they confuse that with better. And let me give you an example. I recently had a conversation with somebody about where their kids go to school, and they go to this particular school in the area, and they said that their kids eat 2 meals there a day because it's a school that provides meals for all the students. And this was a believing family, and they had said if they start parenting our kids, we will pull them out of the school. Like when the school gets in the place where they try to become the parent of my kid, they were saying, I'm not married to this public school. We don't have to do public school, but if they start parenting my kids, I'm going to pull them out. And I thought to myself, you don't realize that they didn't have to try. You just gave them your kids. If they're having half of their meals of the week with a public school, they are half the parent. They're there over most of the waking hours of the day, and they sleep at your house, but they eat more meals during the week at this public school than they do with you. They didn't have to fight you to parent your kids. The reason why I'm saying that is because whenever people hear anything that is convenient, we automatically jump to it. It's more convenient to send your kids somewhere to eat food and you not have to make it and say, well, the school provides for it, so why wouldn't I take advantage of it? Than doing what's harder and saying, no, I'm keeping my kids for this, morning breakfast because having meals together is very important.
Or even like putting your kids on the school bus.
Well, there is a litany. There are a lot of issues. That is another one. The whole, this is a thing in Oconee County. People love that their kid, and I know this is not going to sit well with a ton of people, and I don't mean it to be again, I'm not looking at everyone's situation and trying to be overly critical, but I think that we should take a step back and analyze the situation here, that people capitulate on small things, and those small things add up to something larger. And so whenever you hear something that sounds convenient, I would be really cautious about just jumping on it because it's convenient, because it comes at a cost. And especially if it has anything to do with your kids. Convenient food comes at a cost. Convenient schools comes at a cost. Convenient meals at school comes at a cost. Convenient time comes at a cost, right? So
What do you mean convenient time?
like I'm not gonna, it's not convenient to talk. Let's say your kid comes home, they have something they want to talk about, something or something's bothering them. It's like, I have stuff to do right now.
Okay.
Like, it would be easier, you'll calm down if you just watch a show so I can get this done. That's very inconvenient. Like, I'm trying to get some, well, guess what? That is what it means to be a mother. That's what it means to be a father, is to put yourself aside. So, I mean, similar to the, in Oconee County, the students get picked up right in front of their house. They can be, not everyone does, but they can be picked up by the school bus right in front of their house. It's super convenient because you don't even have to put them in the car. You don't even have to drive them to school. And it's like, it's easy. They did it for me, and I didn't even have to pay anything extra. Be very, very wary of things that are free, of things that are given to you
Be wary of Greeks.
by by faceless entities. Faceless entities that offer you free things you should be very suspicious of them, very cautious with them. And so, yeah, why is it a big deal for a school bus, to pick students up from their house? That is so far down the line of issues, actually, but it's another one. Now it's assumed that you're not going to have that time in the car with your kids to talk. You're not going to have those conversations together. You're not going to have more discipleship opportunities. You've given it to somebody else, and they are being discipled. You are always being discipled, and your kids are always being discipled, and it's up to you as the mom and the dad, primarily the father, to decide how they're going to be discipled. And if you're trading your discipleship for convenience, that's between you and the Lord, but I would really, really encourage you to reconsider why you're giving that up and why you're letting convenience be paramount in your life. Again, same with food, same with time, all of that stuff. So be cautious of that. Is there anything else that popped into your mind, an encouragement or a warning or anything that you want to say?
Yeah, I think my encouragement would just be for women to pursue a more domestically oriented life, and for men to figure out how to support your wives in that, so that they feel secure and like everything isn't going to come crashing down if they're not working 20 30 40 hours a week, or that they have the rhythms, the time, the support, whatever it is, to do the things that they need to do. You can't expect your wife to multiply nothing. You have to give her something,
right?
Give her something to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And so husbands and wives need to have frank conversations about that. Probably there's marriages, even in ours, where there's some repenting to do of not being considerate enough, perhaps a husband not being considerate enough about the needs of his wife or domestic dreams, or wives refusing or willfully skirting around what they know they need to do because they've been impacted by feminist ideas, or they just don't want to obey. And so if your first reaction in hearing this was your gorge rising up, like, oh no, don't tell me what to do, it's something you need to take to the Lord, and certainly talk about it with your husband, talk about it with your wife, with an older man or woman that you respect, and parse through it and don't feel like you have to make all these changes at one time.
Yeah, God, the Lord really is so slow to anger, right? And abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. And he brings things to mind so that you would repent and so that you would choose not what Philippians says, not just what is good, but what is best. That we would choose, we'd be a people that choose what is the best to do. So this wasn't to heap shame, for sure. And people really don't know how deeply entrenched feminism is into the way that we think. That's for another episode, but that's some food for thought. Okay, I think that's it. We're going to go to bed.
Yeah, signing off.
Good night.